Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the joint committee meeting of the Public Safety and Transportation and Environment. We have one item on our agenda this afternoon. It's Bill 3621. It's the Motor Vehicles and Traffic e-Scooters operating requirements and registration. I'm going to ask Mr. Drummer to lead us through. This was an initiative that Council President, I guess before he was Council President, Albornoz and I initiated. And it's as the title explains, it's about e-scooters. We did it for safety measures and for those purposes. And then, of course, we've gotten some information that perhaps we should be thinking about additional things, what this could cause as well. So we're looking at trying to figure out what's the best way to go forward with it. And I'm going to turn this over to Council Member Hawker to see if he has any opening remarks.
I think I'm good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Councilmember Albornoz, did you have any opening?
I did. Thank you, Chairman Katz. So I know it's been a while since we've revisited this important issue, but just for context and to refresh everyone's memory, several years ago, after a situation that I had in the District of Columbia, which is a situation many folks have with these e-scooters, in which I was literally paying a parking meter, parking in downtown, and a young man who had AirPods on and was holding a cup of coffee drove one of these devices around the corner at a very significant speed, and I literally had to dive out of the way to not get hit. And there had been a proliferation of these devices in cities across the country, and there were a rise in accidents and cases. We also heard for our Commission for the People with Disabilities, our Commission on Aging, expressing grave concerns about these products. And we had very productive sessions with our colleagues and friends in the Department of Transportation regarding a pilot program that they were in the midst of looking at and conducting an analysis over. And of course, that led to the development of legislation that we then had to put on hold as we were dealing with other priorities. And that's what brought us here today. I really want to thank Dr. Bonner-Tompkins and the OLO team, who provided some excellent feedback and comment on the bill as it's currently written, and really appreciate the meeting we had just a couple of weeks ago to go through each of the individual line items so that we could each understand better sort of the context and background. And that laid out, moving forward, some really great recommendations on how to even better collaborate and work with our colleagues in OLO as we develop other important racial equity analysis for all that we do. So I look forward to this discussion, but I'm confident that we're going to arrive at some reasonable measures that both address the very important concerns raised in the racial equity analysis, but also improve the bill based on some comments and feedback we've received from the public and, of course, our friends in the Department of Transportation. So I look forward to a productive session and voting this out of committee soon so we can get it to full council, because these devices are, especially as the spring and the summer comes, are going to become even more popular. So thank you.
Thank you. And I do also want to thank everyone who's on the call, but certainly Dr. Elaine Bonner-Tompkins from the Office of Legislative Oversight, and Mr. Drummer, who did an excellent job once again of doing this packet. Do any of my colleagues have anything to say at this point, or because I'm going to turn to Mr. Drummer right afterwards. Okay, silence is golden. Mr. Drummer, the packet is yours.
Okay, good afternoon. This bill is, as Council President Albornoz explained, had been introduced a couple of years ago, went through this joint committee. The committee made some amendments. The bill expired. It never got to full council during the height of the pandemic, in part because we were telling people to stay home. It didn't make much sense to start regulating e-scooters, I suppose. We were busy with other things. The bill was reintroduced with the amendments that had been added by the committee this joint committee last time it went through. So the bill has all of the amendments that were done last time. The bill would do several things. It would require people who are under 18 operating an e-scooter to wear a helmet. The helmet provision is identical to the provision that we have for bicycles. It would would permit registration of an e-scooter that's for personal use in the county. It's not mandated you're renting it. As for the bicycles, I believe. The registration, however, there is a registration mandatory requirement for e-scooter fleets, which is defined as a person or company that owns 2 or more e-scooters for rent in the county. That includes paying a registration fee. Then there's some requirements for the e-scooters to be identified with a company name. And then there's also some requirements on operation of e-scooters, requiring it must not be operated by a person under the age of 14. There's a maximum speed limit of 15 miles per hour. There are reflectors required. And there are parking requirements to not leave them in the middle of a pedestrian zone and things of that nature. And the enforcement is the same as the enforcement provisions generally for motor vehicle violations. The helmet and there's also provision that, and this is the same as it is for bicycles, that the county police can impound an unregistered e-scooter that's provided for rent until it's properly registered. The county police must give an impounding receipt to the owner, and they must hold it until it is registered. If nobody wants to register it, it can be donated to a nonprofit organization or disposed of in the manner of abandoned motor vehicles. Places a responsibility for a parent or guardian of a minor, must not knowingly allow that minor to violate the article, and also includes a provision on no, this is not a failure to use a helmet is not evidence of negligence. That mirrors the state law. We do have here representatives from the Department of Environmental Protection who can answer questions about what's going on now. Currently, the executive has been negotiating agreements with the rental fleets. As you suggested, as you mentioned before, Dr. Elaine Bonner-Tompkins is here to talk about the racial equity statement. And we do have representatives from at least 2 of the current fleet owners, Perry Holmes, Bird Rides, and Brianna Bledsoe of Spin, who can answer questions about how it's working with them right now. That's the bill from it's not environmental protection. I take that back. Department of Transportation.
I was going to correct
I just transferred 3 people to another department.
Okay.
Sorry about that. Hannah Henn from Department of Transportation, Deputy Director, Gary Ehrenrich and Sandy Brecker, all from DOT. talk just briefly about the racial equity statement. OLO found that the bill could widen racial and social inequities in transit options, law enforcement, and possibly traffic injuries. OLO pointed to statistics showing racial inequities in transit options, law enforcement, and traffic injuries, suggested some amendments to mandate certain operating procedures for e-scooter rental companies, such as setting e-scooter availability in areas with underserved transportation options, providing a cash option, because right now I believe you need a credit card, is my understanding, in order to rent an e-scooter. And requiring a discount for low-income residents and possibly an educational program, and providing some free helmets to people who are low-income potential riders. And with that, I think if you want to hear, probably should hear from DOT first.
Well, thank you. I'm going to hear from Dr. Bonner-Tompkins first, and then I'll turn to DOT. Dr.
Okay.
Bonner-Tompkins, did you have any additional discussions?
So, good afternoon. Bob, he captured the racial equity and social justice statement very well. So there's nothing I would add.
Thank you. And now let's hear from people who've been moved back to the Department of Transportation from the Department of Environment just a moment ago. Anyone want to chime in, please?
Well, I can go over each of those points, and I know Sandy Brecker as well can. We have a tally, a table that staff has put together that deals with what each of the three operators do in many of these same areas that have been identified. So, for instance, cash option, all three of the operators, actually two of the three operators offer a cash payment option today by working directly with the operator. And they're here if you want more information to describe their programs. Dealing with availability, we limited the pilot initially to Silver Spring Tacoma Park area, and also on the west side, really just north of the Beltway, up through Rockville. So it includes many equity emphasis areas. And we've then expanded to Gaithersburg and Germantown. So the program is expansive. And one of the issues, though, I think is a very good one that we have to address, is the distribution of the scooters. So even though the area is open to the program, there is not always a even distribution elsewhere. Like today, we have maybe 185 scooters out there in operation from the three companies. And I would say the majority of them, 2/3 of them, are in the North Bethesda and Rockville area, and 1/3 probably in the Silver Spring Tacoma Park. It's simply because of the weather and the demand. But by expanding to Germantown recently, we think we've begun to look at how to provide services to the population up there, as well as to Gaithersburg. And we're working with other parts of the county to look at expanding as well. So I would say I was told 90% of the trips are made or ending in equity emphasis areas. So it is fully being used by people that either live there or have a destination in those areas. This issue of educational programs, we and this is Sandy's group, commuter services in particular, have done an excellent job of providing almost monthly education programs where we invite at least one of the companies to come to a safe, usually parking lot, and we advertise, and members of that company and others come and learn how to ride. One of the things we said at the first go round is that we were very concerned about people riding for the first time who have no experience or imbalance to understand where the brakes are and how to operate the scooters. And that so this provides an orientation. And at that orientation, the companies provide free helmets. There is also free helmets by contacting the company. All three companies do provide free helmets. And we also will make sure as part of our capital bike share program, Sandy can talk about how we also offer the ability to acquire helmets. So the education program, the helmets, and the discounts. So there is a discount program. All three have. It's almost a requirement of ours. They can talk about their equity program, but it generally, I believe, is 50% off on the price of the ride. I will also say that during the early parts of COVID, we were very concerned about the importance of the micromobility program, because we wanted it to continue to provide services for essential workers. As bus service and rail service was being restricted and limited, we felt that it was a great opportunity for people to use micromobility to get to jobs. And we did find, and then other operators around the region also found, and maybe the operators can talk about as well, how important the scooters have been to getting people to jobs, particularly the essential workers. What we found was that we saw scooters going into neighborhoods where we hadn't seen before, and longer trips, and in length and in time. So we've assumed, although we haven't asked the question, we've assumed that these were people that hadn't used scooters before and found it more convenient than perhaps taking public transportation. So we're pleased to see that, although the number of rides were diminished and the number of scooters available were reduced, we did feel that it had a very important place. So I think in dealing with the recommendations, the good recommendations from OLO, I think we have a program that addresses these. Where we need to work on, and we always need to improve, is we need to find a way of expanding the program countywide. We have intentionally kept the program out of Bethesda and Friendship Heights. And the reason is not because there isn't the market. That's where the best market probably is. The reason is we've had a lot of roads under construction, and we just felt we weren't ready to put scooters in where we had a lot of congestion, a lot of pedestrian, and a lot of sidewalks restricted for construction. So we will have to re-examine that decision relatively soon. And we're also looking at putting a permanent program together, which will include a lot of things that we've learned over the last several years. So about distribution, availability, parking is very, very important, and enforcement. So we are looking at how to include all of those things in a permanent program and an MOU with the companies. I don't know if Sandy or Hannah want to add to that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would just add a couple of things. There was a comment about infrastructure, and yes, currently we do prohibit riding on sidewalks. That's something that we probably will need to address in a more proactive way as we move forward with our permanent program. And also education-wise, we have a lot of information on our website, including a video on how to ride, how to properly park, the ADA concerns that Councilmember Albanese mentioned, and trying to enlist the folks who are using these to be more sensitive to those kinds of issues. This is to some extent a culture change. And we're finding the incidences of violations of some of this are reducing. over time as more people are used to using these, as more people are used to seeing them on the roads, et cetera. But there are still issues. I'm not saying everything is solved. And so we are working on that. And one of the ways that we're doing that is a corral program so that we can have areas that are designated for proper parking, and working with the vendors to get some incentives for folks to actually locate the scooters when they park them in these corrals in the high activity areas. And the vendors can address that as well as who are here. A challenge here is the refinement of the GPS system, which is progressing so that we can actually document when a scooter is properly parked and when it's not. So that's something that moving forward, we're hoping we'll have a little bit more technology to assist with. I think those are the only points I wanted to make now. And I don't know if Hannah is on. Hannah,
Yeah, I'm
is,
here.
oh, okay, Hannah. I
Hello,
didn't
thank
see
you.
Sorry.
Yes, thank
Sorry.
you. Thank you for bringing us in on this topic. And yes, and I had testified on this a few months ago. The only thing I wanted to add is, in addition, so Gary mentioned that, this was an important service during COVID. It was also, there's a lot of flexibility to it. And so that's one important factor in trying to establish the availability of scooters for the long term, is that we have seen firsthand that needs can shift, and that we can shift their where they are deployed across the county to meet changing needs. So in addition to being available to people who may not have used them before COVID, the companies also worked with us to have free rides for essential workers. And there are a lot of benefits to the flexibility of them that we want to preserve as we grow the system. And then in terms of parking, I would say yes, overcoming the GPS would be a great benefit to the long-term success of the program. I have had a lot of interest in parking them within our parking garages, designated spaces, but at this point in time, you can't locate a scooter if it's in a garage, is my understanding. So we are, as Gary said, we are working to continue to improve the system.
Thank you. Is there, I see that there's people from the industry on. I see Brianna Bledsoe from Spin and I don't know if others from the industry are here. Ms. Bledsoe or whoever else might be here from the industry, did you want to say a few words, please?
Yes, my name is Brianna Bledsoe, and I'm a senior public policy manager at Spin. So first and foremost, wanted to thank you for inviting us here just to be a part of this conversation. More so just wanted to be here to answer any questions that anyone may have. But I believe previous speakers have said it perfectly. We absolutely are invested in safety education, making sure that we are providing vehicles and equity zones, low-income programs, rider education, and access to free HEMAs. Those are absolutely things that we are committed to. And happy to also talk about just some clarifying questions that we had about the bill, as well as just providing one. I believe that there was somebody noted that there was an edit in the document about how far out the rear light should be visible, and it was changed from 60 and it should be 600, not 60 feet.
The other way around.
Yes, the other way around. It should be
60.
not 60. No, not 60. It should be 600.
Right. That's I actually sent Bob Drummer a note on that. Bob,
okay.
I think you got it. That that was not a typo. It was supposed to be 600 feet.
Okay.
And that's consistent with the state law.
Okay.
That's
But
right.
happy to answer any questions that anyone may have about our service. And we also have our operations manager, Terrell Monroe, who handles our operations in DC, including Montgomery County. And he can also answer any specific operational questions that you may have as well.
Thank you. It's pretty obvious he's with Spin. If you look on yeah, somehow I picked up that little subtle note. And Mr. Holmes, you're with another group, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Bird Right.
Perry Holmes here from Bird on the government partnerships team, and would echo everything Brianna said. And thank you, Gary and Sandy, for all your remarks earlier. That covers most of what I wanted to emphasize, but really glad to be here. Happy to answer any questions. We've been in Montgomery County since 2019 and really value the collaborative relationship we have with everyone we've worked with, and are happy to do whatever we can and best practices from other cities and communities to keep evolving and building on the successes of the program.
Thank you. And is there someone here from Lyme, Mr. Gardner? Or?
Mr. Gardner had written me and said that he had a conflict and he could be here. I don't think he's here.
Okay, very good.
He wanted to be.
Well, we appreciate it, and we appreciate working with the industry and all the departments to figure out what's the best way forward here. So with that, Councilmember Albornoz, did you have some suggested amendments? How are we going to work this?
I don't. I thought maybe we could go through the packet, go through each item. And I know Councilmember Hucker and I have been texting each other. I think he may have some. But I think the amendments we worked through during the last committee session sort of speak for themselves.
Okay.
But if we get feedback from DOT or others that something could be tweaked to better reflect where things stand now, as compared to where they were 2 years ago when we originally drafted the bill, I'm certainly open to that discussion. And it's good to hear, by the way, that some of the suggestions that Dr. Bonner-Tompkins made are already in practice. We just probably need to work better together to market them and let the community know that they're available. I know we're open to that.
And to that point, Mr. Drummer, the fact that they are in practice, do we need to put that in any type of legislation, or is that the way that it's working just fine?
Well, there's three ways, I guess. You could just leave things the way they are because there are agreements that seem to be addressing some of these issues. You could put in the law requiring in some general manner the things that we've already just been talking about, or you could require that the executive enter into an agreement with each e-scooter company that covers these areas. That might be the simplest way if you want to put something in the law, is to require an agreement, even though we know the agreement already exists, they're already doing it. But that's this way it would be in the law and not simply, executive agreements that come and go. But it's up to you. It sounds like a lot of the issues, apparently, well, I haven't heard from the industry, but apparently there is a cash option. There is a discount program. Distribution is probably a little hard to legislate. But it certainly could be something that's included in an agreement. Distribution and what are the other issues that we're talking? Well, and educational programs. I mean, DOT is apparently already operating educational programs, and there is a way to get free helmets. So it sounds like that's covered. So it's kind of up to the committee if you want to put something in law to mandate these things, or just continue on with the bill the way it is. The issue I brought up about the 600 feet and the 60 feet, just to explain, that was because the county attorney's office had pointed out that they believe the red reflector on the rear visible from all distances from 600 feet to 100 feet. Asked, is that a typo? It should be 60 to 100 feet. Turns out it's not a typo. It's actually copied from the state law. So that's really not an issue. Number 4. There's a small fiscal impact of the bill to administer and monitor the e-scooter program. So I'm open, whatever the committee would like to do, however you'd like to handle it. Either let the bill go the way it is, put in a requirement that the executive enters an agreement with each scooter agreement covering certain areas that we'd have to write, or putting in the requirements in the bill directly. I think the result would be similar.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
If
Yes. I'm sorry. I didn't see you.
No. I just jumped in. I apologize.
Okay.
Because I appreciate Mr. Drummer's comments, but I'm kind of getting lost in where we are in the conversation. And if it would be okay with you, could we just go through the packet with in the recommended format on the issues so that we could address these in a sequential order?
Okay. Let's do that. Mr. Drummer, do you want to lead us through that, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Sure. Well, the first issue is the racial equity and social justice impact of the bill that I believe we talked about, and that's what I was referencing. Yep. If you'd like to put in requirements in the law for the rental companies to provide cash option, that certainly could be done directly in the law, or it could be done through an agreement, which apparently it has been done. A discount program for low-income residents, I don't think you really want to, I don't know that you can really put the specifics and what the discount would be in the law, but it would be something, that would be negotiated with the administration. The distribution of free helmets, again, that's already happening. Distribution of where the scooters are aligned and where they're available. To some extent, that can be controlled through an agreement. Although, I guess, just like bicycles, people will ride them out of that district and leave them someplace else. So that's the first issue. The second one is, does the bill establish criminal penalties?
Bob, let's go through each one as we go through it, okay? Councilmember Glass?
Yep. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I'll say at the offset, I appreciate the spirit in which you and Council President Albornoz introduced this, having heard President Albornoz's harrowing tale of being out with family and evading ever so slyly an oncoming scooter. And so on this topic, on this point of the equity, I think it was alluded to, but I think it would help all of us to get a picture of who we're talking about, right? We were talking about where they are, the geographic areas. I think I heard a number by Mr. Ehrenrich, I think, saying that 90% of the users were in equity emphasis areas or something. But can we get a little bit more of who the average user is, where they are, and what the routes are like? And I'd love to hear from Mr. Ehrenrich and Department of Transportation, but then also hear from the industry as well.
Okay.
But before Gary jumps into
Ms. Henn, yeah.
Before he jumps into some of that information, which I'm sure he can speak to in more detail, I wanted to add to this conversation on the issue that I think it's clear from the opening statements that we have the same intent that the OLO recommendations are requesting. And as we consider these issues, everyone here knows that this is a new, emerging, evolving industry. And as I would just request that the council members, as you consider this law moving forward from DOT's perspective, focusing on the goals and intent is most important so that we are able to evolve our agreements with the scooter companies to help them to continue to provide the best ways of meeting the intent. So I just want to point out that sometimes in our agreements, we get restricted when we get too specific, and the goals and intent, since we're all aligned on goals and intent, enabling us to really achieve those goals and intent, some flexibility may be helpful since it is an emerging industry. Thank you. And Gary, you can go ahead and answer the questions about the users.
Okay. Thank you. And I think I'll have to rely on the vendors as well. We have not done any kind of user survey to determine more of the profile, the demographic profile of the users. There's only been things that we've observed, such as locations of where the scooters are going, and the fact that the use during COVID and what that pattern has been. So I really can't explain or describe the demographics. However, the scooter companies have much more information.
Well,
about
Mr. Ehrenreich, then can you describe the travel patterns? If
Yes.
you said you had that information.
Yes, we do, and we have graphical information that I can certainly send after the meeting of the major roads that are being used. Every road, we can track the number of scooters per day on almost every link in the roadway system, or scooters per trips per month on that system, and we can plot where they're going. So I can plot and know that people were going when Shady Grove was open, and now it's reopened, the station, that the King Farm to Shady Grove was a very big movement. Very nice and very surprised, but it was very convenient. And we found in Silver Spring, every street in the downtown was well used. And you can see how far it went. And you can see in Wheaton, the patterns around the metro and where those patterns have been. And in Rockville, almost every street in Rockville has had significant scooter use. Now, how far from the downtown are people going? They're going, probably a half a mile or so. The average trip is a mile or less, plus or minus. And that's one thing we noticed during the first part of COVID. It went from a mile or a point, to like a mile and a quarter, a mile and a half. So we know people are going further. And in terms of time, of course, the further you go, the longer it takes. Right. And so we know that, and we can track time, trips, time, and location. So we can track by.
Well, Mr. Ehrenreich, yeah. I appreciate sharing with us either the metrics that we have or don't. I think the 1 mile average trip or a mile and a quarter during the pandemic, I think that's noteworthy. Can you just tell us again the areas? You said downtown Silver
Sure.
Spring, almost every street. Again, I'm just trying to get a broader picture of what we're trying to regulate here.
So basically inside the Beltway.
Yep.
Every spring inside the Beltway, and very, very heavily used. The Tacoma Park to a much less extent. They were part of the first part of the program, and that's been somewhat concentrated with fewer vehicles actually in the city of Tacoma Park. Rockville is about right now. We're looking for about 40% of the fleet in either side, either the Tacoma Park, Silver Spring, or the Rockville side, and so Rockville has always been a very big hub. And again, people go. They generally go up to Montgomery College from a distance in that direction and into the communities a little bit. Okay. And then I said the King Farm area, and in Gaithersburg, more recently, once we moved to Gaithersburg, very limited. Some in Crown, some in Rio, and some in Kentlands. Again, relatively small numbers. Germantown, more recently, right near kind of Middlebrook, 118 and Great Seneca, and that area where the high school is.
Great. Well, I appreciate that trip through Montgomery County. No, and you hit all the high points. That's good. And so if I could ask the industry representatives from your information, proprietary or whatnot, can you share with us what you know about your users, whether they're the users of Montgomery County or the DMV, however you would be able to classify them?
Sure, I can give a few pieces of information here, and something we have not done yet in Montgomery County, but would be happy to do is a survey with our riders to learn more, because we don't generally track a lot of the kind of demographic information for privacy reasons. We're not tracking the a lot of the things that would be very interesting to know from an equity standpoint to study, but we have partnered with other communities to do sort of surveys, and we could do that here. I can point to a recent study from the TCRP that showed a majority of scooter users were women, which was interesting, and might not fit with some of the stereotypes or first impressions people might have, as well as compared to the general population, more non-white people use scooters in micromobility, which is exciting. As this emerges as a new form of transportation that more people are exploring, that we're excited to see that it is serving a pretty wide group of people. And I would emphasize that geography is one aspect of equity. We want to make sure we're serving a wide variety of neighborhoods, but people who live in one neighborhood might need to use this type of transportation in another one. So that's one reason we're proud of our community pricing program, which offers 50% off for lower income individuals, as well as senior citizens, veterans, a few other groups, and nonprofit employees. So I think there's a lot of different ways. As Hannah said earlier, this is a very flexible system, which is great. And working collaboratively with DOT, we've been able to try different things and not get too narrow in what solution we want to mandate, because we might come up with a better one in 6 months and want to be able to go down that road. So I hope that answers.
It does, and thank you for letting us know about your discount programs. Very helpful. Again, a noteworthy aspect of the bill is that, and I'm glad to know that you've already gotten that done. I don't know if Ms. Bledsoe, do you have anything else to add?
Just wanted to echo, Perry's comments, and also just add that because right now in our, MOUs and agreements that we have currently with DOT, that there is already like a 40% distribution requirement within all areas. And so I think if something like that were codified, it would be very difficult for us to kind of pivot and make the necessary changes and adjustments that might be necessary in order to make sure that we're meeting residents' needs and taking that into account. So if we codify something too much and we need to make further changes, we kind of have to come back and do the whole process. Whether a lot of these decisions are left in the MOU, there is that flexibility. Of course, there are still requirements, still things that we must do, but it's a little bit more flexible, and we're able to better anticipate and change and alter and change directions if need be.
Great. Thank you. I think I'm good for the remainder of this issue item number 1. So I'll yield back to you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Council Chairman Hawker, please. Chairman Hawker, are you listening? Tom? I'm going to text him.
Well, while we're waiting for
Mr.
Chairman Katz, let me just, of the 3 options that Bob laid out and based on the feedback and input that we've gotten now, and that the good news is, not surprisingly, a lot of this was already in place. But I think giving some flexibility to the executive branch to be able to negotiate these, acknowledging DOT does report obviously to the council. And so there's an opportunity for us to weigh in a myriad of different ways. I do think it makes sense for, as long as the language is there and it's there now, and a commitment from DOT that it will be there in perpetuity in some form or fashion, then that would satisfy or alleviate my concern.
And I'm in agreement with that as well. Councilmember Hawker, are you with us?
Yeah, I am. I apologize, Mr. Chairman. So I guess I have a few questions about the bill. And I appreciate the folks being here from the industry. Ms. Head, could you explain, or maybe folks who are affected by this elsewhere, could you explain what does DC do in this matter? What does Prince George's do? What does Fairfax do? And what is considered the best practice?
Some of the things that I would start by saying some of the things that DC is doing while our team, and I will turn it over to Gary and Sandy to share the information that they have been, receiving from other jurisdictions. But some of the information we have received recently has actually been evidence of some of the things that DC is trying that may not be so successful. And that is, again, why I get back to the idea of flexibility moving forward so that we can learn and consistently improve. So Gary, could you share some of the lessons learned from neighboring jurisdictions, please?
DC has set up and coordinates. We have a regional phone call about every 6 weeks with all of the operators in the Washington region, including the Park Service, who regulates the mall area. And so we listen to what's going on in Alexandria and Arlington, and Virginia's a little different state requirements, and DC. So we follow DC because we would not be having a program, quite frankly, if DC wasn't available. DC is like the big elephant in the room. They have thousands and thousands of these scooters.
Right.
Companies. So I guess real quick so what we've learned is that we've been following the Lock 2 issue that they legislated October 1st, I believe, is when they started it.
Okay. I'm sorry if you said this. So what does DC do? Do they require helmets? Do they require registration? And do they have an age limit?
Well, the vendors probably know more about that because they're operating in there. But in terms of age limit and speed limits, they do. But the one thing they added more recently in October, which everybody's watching very carefully, is that they require that each scooter and e-bike have a cord that can lock to something so that it can't be left lying on the ground and left kind of in the middle of the sidewalk. And Baltimore has that same requirement. Now, that's why I think what Sandy was referring to has not been so successful. Because we don't have the infrastructure in place to lock thousands or hundreds.
Sure, understood.
So that's one of the big issues and big differences. The other issue is that they much more tightly control the number of vehicles that each vendor can have, a couple thousand. We don't have that problem, so it's not been an issue for us.
Appreciate that. Okay, yeah, it would be helpful to me, Bob, if like in the packet there was a chart that said on all the key issues whether surrounding jurisdictions had legislation in place at all, age limits, speed limits, weight limits, registration for commercial, registration for, and how this measures up and what is considered best practice, because it not only to some degree will affect our residents. I have Silver Spring residents that I'm sure will, commute. They are bound by this proposed law by their residency, right? But they will have to, they will bring their e-scooters, for example, to DC every day to commute, some to Prince George's, et cetera, and vice versa. But also it would just be good to know this is a new industry. And whenever there's new industry, I just hate sort of making up legislation based on, I have lots of anecdotes. Everybody has lots of anecdotes, but there are probably very smart professionals, not as well as industry experts who are here who could probably tell us what is working in other places. And I just have concerns about sort of like why we're in this space. I think there's probably a need to regulate it. I just want to make sure we have all the information that we need, that we're following best practices, and that we're aware of how our law in the future might conflict or conform to, requirements in other jurisdictions. And specifically, I guess, I don't have any issue regulating the industry, obviously, And I certainly don't mind requiring a helmet or the parking restrictions. That's in line with what we do with bicycles and other vehicles. And even when I was in the State House and on the committee that was regulating, bike laws and motorcycle laws and ATV laws, we had a million complicated bills on all those things. Those are all a good thing. I worry that in this legislation we're conflating, and again, this is an emerging industry, but we're conflating, from my amateur knowledge of this, toys which are marketed to and aimed at young kids, as young as 8 and up, that are much lighter, have a very slow maximum speed, and are relatively affordable and are widely used by kids in my neighborhood, and I'm sure a million other neighborhoods. I own 2 of them myself, and my kids are bored with them now, but they really wanted one when they were 8, and all their friends had one, and they wanted to keep up with them. And I don't want to be in a position where I don't think this is ever going to happen, but the law would allow, as proposed, I think, our police to, ticket 8-year-olds or their parents, not for not wearing a helmet. That's obviously a good idea, but for just riding an e-scooter that is marketed to them and goes 10 miles an hour. Some of them don't go more faster than 7 miles an hour. To me, that's very different as a toy than these vehicles that led to Chairman Albernau's experience of, a larger vehicle operated by an adult at a high rate of speed and that's unregulated. I just don't want to. I think we should separate in our heads the commercial registration regulation from personal recreational use and commuting. And I think we should separate adults from kids and toys. But I think they're all kind of put together in the same bill. So I don't have a million suggestions, but that's my concern, is for toys, the 2 I own, they don't go faster than 10 miles an hour. They don't have reflectors. They have an 80-watt battery, which isn't very powerful. And by the time my kids were 10, they're bored with them. So, I don't think they're going to pose a great danger to anybody in the street. But they're pretty widely used, at least in my neighborhood.
Councilmember Hucker, I don't have a comment on the toy versus adult riders, but I do think I found information on what the regulations are in DC, and I will share those here and just ask the operators to correct me if anything has changed and is incorrect. What I'm reading for DC is that users must be this is for shared scooters, users must be at least 16 years old, right, wear helmets if under 18, legally park the devices, obey restrictions on carrying packages while riding, ride only in designated areas, and not ride with passengers.
For shared scooters, yeah. Is there a trade association in this space that probably has some objective expertise in research?
I think we have to rely on Terry and Brianna to answer that.
Trade association, I think NAVSA, National Association of Bike and Scooter Share, is involved in some of this. As people have said, it's an emerging industry, so best practices are sort of still being developed, but certainly happy to be a resource and point to things that work well in comparable communities, which might be DC, or for some purposes for Montgomery County, DC might not be a very appropriate example, just being very different sort of land use and patterns we see there, but happy to help however we can.
I don't know if I should ask the sponsors or other people, but how are these, in terms of the goal of the bill, are they different than, I remember we had a lot of committee hearings on where we revoked the mandatory registration of bikes. Is that correct?
Yeah, and we were thinking of that as well on that. I mean, that was certainly something that should be considered.
And so I appreciate that this is a may and not a must, and right, nobody in Montgomery County is forced to register their bike anymore. Yeah. Do we force them to register e-bikes?
Only
I don't think we do.
Only the rental bikes, the shared bikes.
Right. Yeah, commercial, I think, is different than personal use, to my point. So if we don't register e-bikes, how are these materially different than e-bikes?
I don't think that this law actually requires that these personal scooters be registered either. It says
Right,
may
for
again.
personal use.
Right.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah, it's
Except-
just the commercial, the shared.
But we don't have, right, no, so we don't have an age limit, do we, for e-bikes?
There's an age limit for wearing helmets. I'm not sure
Right.
that there's any restriction on riding e-bikes age-wise. I don't believe
Right.
there are any restrictions.
Right.
Yeah, and the intent, Chairman Hucker, and it has been a while since we've discussed this. You brought this point up the last time we talked about it, but it was 2 years ago when your kids had just purchased them and mine were thinking about purchasing them. So, and full disclosure.
My memory's worse every day.
Yeah, we've got one parked in my garage right now. So, and the intent was never to conflate, obviously, the two. And we had, and I'm going to need Bob's help to figure out whether or not we had gone far enough to be able to ensure that we did not conflate the two, that this was, focused on the commercial use of these devices, which, again, had flooded the zone in a number of different cities across the country, and everybody was kind of trying to catch up and there has been 2 years of information now, as the industry has indicated, some of which has already been applied in the contract that the county executives team has established with these companies. So that's the good news. And I'm happy to further look at DC's guidelines as a model. I know Bob did in his research look at neighboring jurisdictions to see what they did and didn't do. And if we need to adjust and tweak to so that they're one and the same, that makes sense to me.
Sure. Okay. Anyway, those are my concerns. I don't mean to monopolize things, but that's just what's on my mind. I appreciate you refreshing my memory.
Can I suggest two possibilities? One is you could define the electric low speed scooter that you're talking about that requires a certain power or size or speed, so that you would take out what Councilmember Hucker was saying were toys out of this bill. Or you could simply take personal use out of the bill and just regulate the shared use completely. Those are two ways I think you could address what Councilmember Hucker is talking about. Those are my two suggestions. I don't know. There may be other ways to do it. I'm sure there are.
Sandy Brecker, you had your hand up a long time
yes.
ago. Please.
I did. I just wanted to comment on the geographic distribution question, in that if that was incorporated in the code, could present some problems already. Hannah and Barry and others have pointed out some of the issues with regard to codifying, and Brianna as well, codifying some of this and removing some of the flexibility that we really do need as this whole system evolves and as this industry evolves. But one of the points I wanted to make is with regard to geographic distribution. When we have existing companies and they've built up some of their fleet, that's a more doable thing. If we have that kind of requirement and we try to bring any new vendors in, that could be a barrier, a real bar to being able to allow other vendors in. And I'm not saying we would necessarily have an unlimited number of vendors, but we don't have good service in all the areas that we would like ultimately to have it. And it also pertains to the equity discussion. And so, or, a company, present company excluded, might go out of business. And so being able to have that flexibility over time to adjust the geographic distribution according to a number of parameters, I think is very important. And I would just recommend that we not codify that part of it for those reasons.
And I am in agreement with you. I believe that the council president mentioned this as well. Flexibility on this issue is certainly something that needs to be continuing. And it isn't because, for many reasons, and of course, one of the greatest reasons, it's an emerging industry. Having said that, in the district, and I have no problem that this should be for the the commercial side, but in the district, do we know if they do what Councilman Hucker is saying about the toys? Do they in any way have legislation about the toys themselves?
I'm unaware, but I can find out.
Yeah, that would be helpful. Council Vice President Claes.
I think Brianna has an answer.
You do have an answer? Go ahead.
Yes, just to kind of add another layer of complexity to the point about toys is that there are toys, which I don't think we should consider at all, but there's also private use, right? So we have adults who can go out in the market and purchase their own e-scooter that can go well above the 15 miles an hour that our shared e-scooters can go. So I do think that there is some merit to having privately owned scooters having a set of rules and parameters around adults who go out and purchase their own versus a shared program. And also along the lines of this shared program and kind of going along with what else should be included, a clarifying question was just about the fees. Since we already do pay fees to currently operate our permit, is this another layer of fee that we would have to pay in addition to what we already pay? Just to kind of throw another.
Well, and that's not my intent. I'm going to call on Councilmember Glass in 2 seconds. He's been very patient, but it's not my intent that we put more and more fees on an emerging industry. I mean, that would not be wise at all, as far as I'm concerned. Councilmember Glass.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So really good conversation, allowing us to dive deep into how other jurisdictions are operating. You know, the comment that was made earlier about how Baltimore City and I think DC have that locking capability, but we don't have the infrastructure, right? We are a different jurisdiction. And so we're caught in between two worlds of looking at what a more urban grid design city looks like and how they utilize this and how we are using it. Although the geography of the usage, as Mr. Ehrenrich had said earlier before, are in our most urban areas or dense suburb areas, but they are not Baltimore and they're not DC. And so the other aspect I think we just hit upon is trying to find this balance between allowing an emerging market to continue to evolve to our residents' needs, while also recognizing who is using these e-scooters right now. And they are, as the industry stated, mostly women and mostly people of color. And I find myself torn. I don't want to inhibit their transportation options. I don't want to inhibit private sector growth. And the aspects of the bill that I like are already included in the MOUs or within the standard business operating procedures as has been shared with the discounts and some of the other utilizations. And so I just wanted to say I'm not sure that passing this legislation at this point gets us to what we're trying to do, and I do fear that it would inhibit us and inhibit other vendors from coming into the market as we continue evolving. So, those are my thoughts.
That, but what happens if someone who's on a commercial e-scooter is not wearing a helmet? Who stops that person? Who tells that person? I mean, obviously the industry is not going to have somebody following around each person on an e-scooter. So that to me is a safety issue.
Well, and so Mr. Chair, so I agree with that. And so if we want to limit the scope of the bill to make sure that e-scooter users mirror the same roles and responsibilities as bicycle users or other types of transportation, I absolutely am in support of that. But the bill is a little more expansive than that and gets into the business practices and their operating procedures, which I'm concerned about.
And I appreciate that. Ms. Henn, please. You're on mute.
Thank you. I just wanted to say, in terms of the Councilmember Glass's comments on what we're legislating versus what is already in our agreements, is that we don't have agreements with private scooter owners. So if there are interests in private scooter owners wearing helmets or parking properly, that is not within the realm of our jurisdiction under existing law, which could be addressed by the approach you're talking about.
And so is that delineated anywhere? What is, the parameters of operation or license agreements, whatever they might be with the industry versus what is not addressed? Because I think that might, I don't want to say the starting point because we're well beyond the starting point, but that would help focus the conversation on where our statutory authority could be best applied. Does that make sense?
It does. I don't know that I'm the one to answer that question in terms of, I do not know. What I'm familiar with are the agreements that we have with the operators, because we are allowing them a franchise license, I understand, or a pilot license to operate in the county. I'm unaware of, because we do not enforce helmet use among cyclists. That's not a DOT function. So I don't know how that would apply to private e-scooter riders. Sandy, it seems that you have some information.
I just wanted to add that the helmet requirements for bike use apply to people under the age of 18. Under the shared scooter program, and the vendors who are here can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe all of them have a requirement that those using their scooters are required to be 18. So there is not a crossover there with regard to helmet use under existing law, because our law, and actually the state law, is a little bit less conservative than we are. It says under 16, but our county law says under 18. And so I think Brianna was nodding her head. I can't see Perry right now, but I think that all of them require that basically that the people using these be adults, 18 or over.
We do at Bird as well. That's correct.
Ms.
And
Bledsoe,
the bill
Bledsoe,
doesn't
did you have
require.
anything else to add on that?
No, just that we require all of our riders to be 18 or older. And we do support mandatory helmet requirements for minors, but not for adults. We do have various programs and ways that we do provide free helmets to our users, as well as educate them about wearing a helmet and that they should wear a helmet. But in other jurisdictions, just have not seen a mandatory helmet requirement for everyone. Although I will be very honest, Miami is the only city that I've seen so far to do something like that, and that's already caused a lot of problems with the program. So that's really not the direction that a lot of other jurisdictions have gone. It's really just a mandatory helmet requirement for minors.
Thank you. Councilman Glass, I interrupted you. I apologize.
No. I didn't mute myself back, but the point that was just made about the helmets, right? So I think I'll speak for myself. I would be supportive of some helmet requirement, but if the county doesn't require helmets for anyone over 18, right? And the vendors already require helmet use, or they don't rent to anyone under 18. So then this gets back into the point that Councilmember Hucker was alluding to before. What about kids in the neighborhood, right? Are we in this gray area that we're then legislating for the parent who gets a scooter for a 12-year-old? And I understand the safety needs. I'm not minimizing that. I'm just trying to figure out which lane we're in right now in terms of this regulation.
Okay. Well, in terms of Councilmember,
if I could just ask.
Yes, please.
Sorry. Ms. Han, I believe it was you that read the regulations from the District of Columbia. Where are those regulations? Are they in law? Are those in the contracts with the respective organizations? Where are those? Where did you read them from?
I read that from a news report from October of 2019 saying that they had passed and this is what they included. I didn't open the regulations themselves.
Because what you described gets to the heart of my concerns and why I signed on to this bill in the first place. How do we reasonably make sure that these are not left strewed in the middle of streets? And I know there are contracts in place and requirements for the companies to be able to remove them as quickly as possible. But just in the last I'm sure the industry is facing some of the same challenge that the entire world is right now with staffing levels, just as an example, and may not be able to comply as quickly as I'm sure even they would like to be able to. And having more than just one person ride these at the same time, there just has to be some reasonable parameter by which we can define what's in bounds and what's out of bounds. And so I think I'd love to, as a follow-up, for us to look at just the what you enumerated, and see how or if that can be incorporated into what we're discussing here, because in your description, it pretty much nailed what I was looking for. The helmet use is of concern to me for sure, but the bigger concern is just providing some reasonable guidelines, because these are, as a new and emerging technology, they're not really bikes. Our urban streets, they weren't developed for this type of technology and how it's exactly used. And so back when we talked about this 2 years ago, I remember folks in DOT and law enforcement just weren't sure what to do with them, how to handle them, and that was a big problem. So that was another reason why they had actually requested that there be some parameters by which they could, figure out something that was reasonable. Because I'm sensitive to what Council Vice President Glass said, which is we don't want to in any way stop a new and emerging multi-mobility option that is helping people whom we want to make sure have more options for sure. But there just, again, need to be some reasonable parameters around it.
And as I started out, and Gary, I'll get to you in 2 seconds. As I started out by saying, this legislation started out because of safety concerns. It became something beyond that, but I still go back to the basics. My number one concern were the safety concerns. And Gary, please.
And thank you, because 2 years, a lot has happened. And one of the things that has happened is that the companies, I believe 2 of the 3 companies that we operate in the county actually require the user, when they park, to take a picture of their parking space. And they use different types of technology to scan the photos, and they have ways of, I guess, text, email, the person to say that you can't finish your trip, you're going to continue to pay if you don't park correctly. So that is an improvement that we've seen in the last several years. And perhaps that is something that Bird and Spin can talk briefly about, how they regulate the parking issue.
Okay.
Perry, do you want to start, or?
I can go first.
No, go ahead.
I would also, just to pick up on the sort of how these things are defined and regulated, the parking section of this bill is very similar to what we see in other jurisdictions, and whether it's in the terms and conditions or in an ordinance, there are requirements about where riders can park, and then vendors are responsible for correcting that if it doesn't happen. I mean, we have a different time limit, sort of is generally how it works. If that's reported and someone's not parking correctly, then we're responsible for addressing it. So that's sort of how it works, and what's in this bill, and whether it comes in the bill or in our MOU, it kind of is the same outcome as how it functions day to day as we operate. And then just in terms of the ways we encourage and enforce proper parking from our riders, we require the photo review at the end of, they take a photo so we can check in on it and investigate if there's problems. We can ban users who are, repeatedly not following the instructions. We do regular in-person events in partnership with the county to educate. So obviously, as you look around, I think we've seen a decline in complaints and issues as people have developed better norms, and there's a lot of ways we can continue to make progress there. The new corrals that were discussed is something we're really supportive of, and have some new techniques in our app and other products to encourage people to park correctly. So it is exciting to see that develop, and I think we've seen improvement, but this is a challenge that we see in, every city that we're always working to improve.
Okay.
Yes, definitely echo those comments. Yeah, we're absolutely trying to get innovative to make sure that we are addressing these concerns proactively. So we also do have photo review to make sure that riders are actually properly parking their scooter. We have penalties, whether depending on the jurisdictions, the penalties can be monetary penalties, warnings, suspensions, as well as just complete bans from the platform. But we also, more importantly, we also incentivize good behavior. So whenever somebody does properly park a scooter, we make sure that we give them, a certain amount off their next trip. Like, hey, if you just take it over to this crowd, it's not too far from you, you'll be able to get $1 off your next trip, or whatever the case may be. So we penalize bad behavior, but make sure that we also reward good behavior, and we're constantly monitoring. And yes, while COVID has impacted workforces across kind of workplaces across the country, we are required per our agreements to make sure that we are moving vehicles within a specified period of time. So that means that we need to bring on labor to be able to support that. We absolutely do. And I know that our team works 24/7 to make sure that scooters are being not blocking ADA access, not interfering with personal, or it's not interfering with private property. So we definitely make sure that our team can be responsive to whatever relocation needs within a specified period of time. It's typically within 2 hours.
And I just want to add that our team also follows up on complaints very promptly. If we get a complaint, we reach out to the vendor if somebody hasn't already reached out to them. And we've seen good responsiveness from all 3 of our vendors in terms of getting out there. They text or email us back, and so we know that they're following up. Not saying every single time, but most of the time.
Thank you. Ms. Henn, please.
Thank you. And so I was able to find the bill. I'm not going to go through and read the bill here, but there is a lot of good information in it. DC's bill is 23-359. It is focused on electric mobility devices, shared fleet devices, and motorized bicycles. There's a lot of interesting information there, and I will admit I have not read it before the past couple of minutes, scanning through it to see if there's helpful information there. While in this conversation it has been said that we are different from the district, I would say that while we have a different landscape, there are advantages to consistency in this region to, reduce confusion for people on, can I be on a sidewalk? Can I be in the street? Can I be in a bike lane? So I would encourage, if there's an opportunity for us to take some, now that this is my first time participating in this conversation, and now that I'm a part of it, I do see some potential benefit of looking at what has been done in DC now that time has passed, their bill has passed. There could be benefits of looking at that in detail to see if we could be consistent in a way that you all feel meets your objectives.
Thank you. Councilmember Albornoz.
Thanks. We could talk for a long time, but I think just so that I know everybody's really busy, what I would suggest, Mr. Chair, is that we ask Bob, working with our respective teams, to look at that DC legislation, see how it compares to ours. I thought our colleagues made some good recommendations, and then see if we may be able to modify our legislation to reflect better what's already been acted in the district, and then come back to this in some reasonable amount of time to give everybody enough time to do their due diligence and homework, and then have the discussion again with that as a framework. And this, just speaking for myself, has sparked more questions in a good way, and that I want to follow up with our industry experts here, and also our colleagues in the District of Columbia as well, just to see what more we can learn from them and how we apply this moving forward.
I agree. Mr. Holmes and Ms. Bledsoe, you both have your hands up. Do you mean to? Yes.
I just wanted to suggest, as well as you look at DC, Arlington, Alexandria, and Fairfax would also be great examples to look at. Their regulations are pretty consistent with each other, and might be a useful example to reference as in addition to DC.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Bledsoe.
Yes, I was just going to add that I'm actually more than happy to share a best practices document that really just grapples with all of these different questions about sidewalk riding, what type of jurisdiction should allow sidewalk riding, and age limits and age restrictions and helmets. I mean, it goes through kind of the whole program kind of from start to finish. What are some state level concerns? What are some municipal concerns? As well as what are some factors? What are some criteria that should be seen in RFPs? So just kind of give you just some lessons that we have learned throughout our few years operating in this industry. And of course, happy to answer any follow-up questions you may have, but just wanted to provide that as an additional resource for you all to look at as you're looking through what some of the neighboring jurisdictions are doing as well.
Thank you. I do think that, first off, I think that consistency makes a whole lot of sense. And there again, as much as I would like this to be finished at some point, I do think if we're going to do it, we need to do it right. So with that, Mr. Drummer, are you comfortable with what is being thought about here, and will get back to us? Where are we in the process?
Well, what I'm hearing is that you want us to look at other jurisdictions with regard to the provisions that are in the bill. And also the question of personal use vehicles by children, whether they're included in the regulations or not.
Well, I think we're saying that we don't want them included in the regulations.
I didn't hear any consensus on how you would want to handle. I heard what President Albornoz said about the equity distribution and the cash option, and the other factors that were brought out in the testimony that people were actually already doing, that are mentioned in the racial equity.
And I believe that was suggested, that since that is a negotiated agreement with the commercial side, that we allow them the flexibility to do that. And Gabe, am I putting words in your mouth on that?
No, but I think what Bob's saying is he only heard from me and not from other members of the committee.
Well, I'm in agreement with what is being suggested there. I don't know if anybody else is. I see a head shake from the
as well.
Two other members. Yes. Okay. So we
got that.
And Tom has two heads because he's on both committees. So, yeah.
2 heads, 4 hands.
Yeah.
And I think you will see when we look at the legislation in the surrounding region, from just what I'm kind of glancing through, there are references to helmets, but again, more to the goals that the provider should make helmets available through, an agreement with the director of the department and things of that nature. They do reference inclusivity and income and helmets, but if we could focus on the goals, the end goals, I think that would be helpful.
Okay. Anything else, Mr. Drummer?
No, I think I'll work with DOT, not DEP, and with the vendors, and come up with what might be consistent and what's not consistent with other jurisdictions.
Yeah, we
can come back.
We'll put a spreadsheet together that shows what the other jurisdictions are doing. We have connections and access, and that's something that we can do, make sure we contribute in that regard. We have a lot of it already. We do have the best practice document that Brianna talked about, and we've been using that. And in fact, one of the things is that some of the best practices are things that we started. And so I'm really proud of some of the things that we have in our MOU. But in any event, it is evolving, and things are getting better.
Yeah. Anybody else on the committee, the joint committees, have any other topics? If not, thank you all very, very much for being with us. We appreciate you working with us. We're going to come back when we can come up with the best legislation we can possibly come up with. And with that, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.